Have you ever felt that something was not right, but you could not figure out what it was? What's really is upsetting about that is that you can't get rid of that feeling. It seems to stay with you, haunting you in the night, as you lay in bed unable to sleep. It had not reached the point that it had entered my dreams, but I knew that if I didn't come up with an answer soon it would. That's how I had been feeling for months. I don't know why, because things in our lives, everything appeared to be going great. Both my wife Margaret and I had very successful, busy careers. Yet we still found the way to put the needs of the family first. Our children were becoming nice, respectable teenagers in their own way. Those troubling teenage years, by the grace of God, had so far been gone through smoothly. I was extremely proud of how each one of them was turning out. The Pig and Whistle restaurant and bar we owned was doing very well. The restaurant side was a local favorite for its smoked pork and barbecue ribs with a selection of sides. Most of the earnings from it were directed into a growing fund for our kids' further educational needs after high school. Although my wife and I had argued about it because she wanted a bigger house, I put giving our kids the best opportunities they could have in life first. My thought were, why should we have a bigger house when, in 5 to 8 years, there would be just us because, one by one, they would be moving out. She had been against the idea of opening a bar and restaurant right from the beginning, but I used the headship teaching from the scriptures for reinforcement. It had been a hard decision to go for it when I did because I knew that Margaret was dead set against it. She had fought me as hard as she could. It was a rough few months for both of us because it drove us almost to the point of breaking up. Margaret did not like me having the final say on anything. After all, she was a woman, and don't most women feel that way anyway? Most of the time, she ended up getting her way anyway. Most married men, when questioned, have to admit their wives rule the house. The pastor of our church was the one that got us to finally talk things out. Margaret's worry was that I was putting everything we had built together at risk. In her eyes, I had endangered her sense of security. To be honest, I hadn't seen it that way at all. In a way, I had to admit that she was right because, if it had failed, we would have been bankrupt. The pastor made it clear that we as a couple had failed to understand the emotional needs of the other and had deliberately stopped communicating. Neither one of us had been honest enough with each to share our fears or hopes. For that, we were both at fault. Outside of the general manager and the head chef, most of my staff were members of the church. Indirectly, it had been their support that had made the restaurant and bar such a success. The restaurant side of the building closed at 9 p.m. nightly, 6 nights a week. From the start of it, I had refused to have it open Sundays, and it is still run the same way. I didn't realize in the beginning how different it made our business compared to others in the market. From the moment we opened, we were the constant topic of conversations to all. I did it because after the rush at lunch on Sundays, most of the restaurant and bars were 3/4 empty anyway. I could not see myself taking off Sunday while forcing others to work. The bar was open from noon to 1 a.m. as per state law. From Thursday through Saturday night, we had a live band, always along a country and western theme. On Monday and Wednesday, we had it set aside for open mic. Thanks to the locals, it had become their adopted hangout. Anyone who could play a tune was welcome. It had turned out to be a wise move on our part. For many, it had become a social event that was talked about for weeks. At least 3 times a month, we had a bunch of songwriters playing their latest tunes to get feedback. Tuesday was cultural night, and as a result, we were exposed to music from different cultures from around the world. Our small multicultural communities, thanks to the university, enlightened us on their version of what we would call classical or folk music once a month, and it was always booked weeks in advance. As a result, we had a lot of foreign university students attending because it drew them closer to things back home. When their family came to visit, they had to come to experience it. Many of their parents told us it helped their children to cope. That night became the night that my wife and I would attend regularly as a couple because it exposed us to different cultural things on an ongoing basis. A lot of our long-term friends were made through that avenue. Over the years, I had picked up enough knowledge to say hello, welcome, you look good tonight, and good night in 6 languages. An added plus, it brought me a lot of new clients to my daytime job. From that point on, we worked it hard at those 2 parts of our life that our pastor said needed attention, and it had drawn us closer in our walk of life than we had ever have been. Within 5 years, we both agreed it was the best decision we had made as man and wife. Of course, in time she took all the credit for it. Nowadays, everyone believed that she had forced me into it. To those in the church and the pastor, we were considered the model couple everyone looked up to as a sample of how a family should present itself. Our kids had no tattoos, no body piercing, or wild outlandish hairstyles. When they attended Sunday service, they were dressed in class and style. Oh, I had been pressured by the 3 to allow it. We as a family had a big discussion because my oldest had wanted a tattoo. I had the Mehndi henna tattoo dye applied to them all. I did not realize that for our children, it would turn out to be quite the experience. After it took 8 weeks to fade away, they never asked for it to be done again. Nothing like learning the hard way that doing things to your body to achieve something is not going to give you the desire you want. It really bothered me because I could not figure out why I was feeling the way I did concerning my relationship with my loving and supporting wife. The only thing that stood out was that my wife and I were developing an emotional distance between each other, and I could not put a finger on what was causing it. As far as I could see, there was nothing that could be causing the problem. I had even doubled my efforts to put her needs first, and even that was not working. It was reaching the point where I was near my wit's end. I had been noticing that it had been getting worse these last 3 years. With 18 years of marriage behind us, we had it pretty good. We had paid off the mortgage in 10 years and were basically debt-free. We were blessed with 3 healthy children. Jean, our oldest at 16, was a walking, taking mini version of her mom. Agnes, our second, was 15, was the one who owned my heart, took after my mother's side of the family and sang in our church's choir. Wade, at 14, our only son, was going to be one of the biggest, thickest linebackers you have ever seen when he grew up. Spanking him since he was 10 had hurt my hand more than it did him. All 3 of them had been born 18 months apart. Wade, because of his size at birth, had done a lot of internal damage to my wife. As a result, she could no longer carry children. He had weighed 10 pounds 8 ounces at birth and had never looked back. She had taken a long time to recover from that emotionally. I had been so concerned that I had suggested that we consider adoption, but she ruled that out rather quickly. As soon as our youngest started grade school full-time, she went out and got the job she was still in. During that time, she had 3 different bosses. My name is Raymond Burns, no relation to the Scottish poet, even though it was my poetry writing that helped me to win my wife's hand. I am an agent for State Farm Insurance, and I have my own office with a staff of 3, so I make a very good living. Margaret works for the Chief of Police in Cape and was his executive assistant. Family time to us was very important. But such as it is with all family, when your children start maturing as teens, their interests, their thoughts, and personality begin to shine. Each one was demanding more time for their friends and social things than they did with us. It's hard for any parent to come to the understanding that their children no longer needed them emotionally as much as they did when they were younger. Yet Margaret and I were adapting to the changes that come as your children grow up. Although we lived our lives trying to be Christians, active in our faith, we did not push our view on others because we had the view that our walk in life said it all. Marge called towards the end of the day, on that Friday, to say that something had come up. They were having another meeting with the Jackson City managers dealing with the expansion of the county jail and the new county courthouse. Both Peter Reynolds, her boss, and my wife had to attend. This had not surprised me because this was quite a common thing. For the last 3 years, they had been working with this, and now it was nearing completion. There had been so many of these last-minute meetings that it was developing its own normalcy. With our 3 teenagers each having their own plans for the evening, it left me with nothing to do. What I would normally be doing had been changed because of spring break. I decided to swing by my restaurant for a bite to eat after I had changed out of my work suit. Peter, my wife, and I did have a history, but that had been years ago when the 3 of us had attended the same high school. We hadn't seen him in years, until 4 years ago. Marge and I had grown up from kids knee-high to a grasshopper, less than 2 city blocks away from each other. Our fathers still worked in the same factory making washer and dryers for the retail market. She was interested in boys before I was in girls. In high school, we had hung with different crowds. Each had different directions in life. I didn't have time for girls. While most boys were chasing them, I was spending my spare time making money for the hot car I was building for drag racing with friends once a month. I must admit I was consumed by it. My dad's father had given me his love for cars and speed. As I was growing up, my parents allowed me to spend as much time with him as possible. It started out with handing him the tools he needed, and me asking him why. By the time I was 10, I was working beside him as he built or repaired the hot rods. For months before the fall senior prom, Margaret's boyfriend got killed in an accident while drag racing. I wasn't there that night because I was working at Taco Bell in their kitchen. I heard through my father that her dad was furious that she was there that night because she could have been in his car. I understood that it had scared the hell out of him. Margaret and I knew each other at the time, but her group and their attitude did not sit well with ours. Her friends were in it for the glamour, reputation, and attention. We were in it for the challenge of getting the victory with the fastest speed. As a result, I put my latest hot rod with the 454, 4 on the floor, 4-barrel up for sale, and I had sold it within a week. My father was blown away when he came home from work to find that I had bought a stripped-down frame of an old 40s Ford pickup for $200 to rebuild. We had to haul it out of a local farmer's and used field. To be honest, it wasn't in good shape. It was still covered in dirt and mud sitting on 4 blocks of wood. Just as he saw it for the first time, he said, "Which farmer saw you as a sucker and sold you that piece of crap?" In my spare time, I had repaired it section by section by cutting out the rust, replacing fenders, applying bonding and sheet metal where needed. Then I had to sand it all down until it was smooth. The hard part was finding the parts for the undercarriage. If I got stuck on something, my grandpa would come over and advise me on it. He, like me, saw the potential in it. In his growing enthusiasm, he fabricated a few major parts that I needed for the undercarriage. It got so interesting to him that he would come over and take pictures of its gradual transformation. The next free weekend, I painted it with undercoating and primer. The following weekend, I painted it twice. Every piece of metal that was not chrome was now midnight black inside and out. My grandfather thought the color was perfect. My dad would look at it and wonder if it was really worth the time and effort. On Labor Day weekend, with the help of a few of my friends and my mother's good cooking, we were able to drop the new motor in, put in the transmission, and do all the wiring. The local upholstery shop had recovered and repaired the bench seating, which was ready for pickup. My grandfather, who inspected everything, said, "This baby is taking shape." By the end of September, I had it finished. Everything needing re-chromed had been done and fastened on. A friend who worked in signage had repainted the lettering for Ford on the back of the truck. We had put white wall tires on it, and I had gotten it inspected, licensed, and insured on the last Saturday of the month. The first one to see it on the road was my grandfather and grandmother. I ended up taking them for a drive out in the country with it before I was allowed to go back home with it. I don't know who enjoyed the drive more, my grandmother or grandfather. Until his dying day, he would occasionally borrow it for an afternoon out with his wife. We would take the truck, when we could, to rallies and car shows. My grandfather loved carrying the conversation about what I had done under his watchful eye. Everyone was impressed when we were able to produce the photo album with all the pictures from start to finish. To this day, I can still remember the job offers I got because of my grandfather's proud bragging. I was driving my latest pride and joy home for the first time after dropping my grandparents off when I saw Margaret struggling with the bag she was carrying. I pulled over and offered her a ride to her home. She had walked to town to do some shopping and ended up buying more than she should have. Surprisingly, she accepted. I learned on the way to her home that to most that she hung out with, I was considered a dork. That didn't surprise me, as I kept to myself. I had a few close friends. Fixing cars and rebuilding them had kept me busy and, as my dad would say, out of trouble. She asked me why I had stopped drag racing. I told her honestly that the death of her boyfriend had forced me to consider changing my direction in life. I was old enough that it was time that I decided what to do with my life. I disclosed to her that it was my hot rod that I had sold that had financed the restoration of the truck I was currently driving. She was surprised to learn that I had already been offered more for it than it was worth. When we got to her parents' house, I got out of the truck to help carry in the bags of items she had bought. I learned that it was all the material and accessories needed so she could make the dress she was going to wear for the prom. It was finding the perfect material that made her decide she should go. She asked me if I had a date, and I explained that I wasn't even planning on going. Her father was out cutting the lawn. He stopped what he was doing to go and check out my restored truck. As soon as Margaret took the bags from me, I went out to talk to him. "Your father has been amazed that you stopped hot rodding so suddenly," he said, "but thought you were a fool to buy this. He didn't think it would amount to anything. Man, have you proved him wrong. I think it's beautiful. How much did it cost you to restore it?" "Not including the labor, about $10,000. I said. "My last hot rod I sold for just over 14. I have already been offered 12 for this as it sits. I had it go through a commercial inspection just to make sure that I had not missed something when I put all back together. Once it passed, I insured it." He said, "That was smart thinking on your part, young man." He had me pop the hood so he could see the motor and was surprised that I had not modified it in any way. He had a bunch of questions and I answered everyone. He brought out the point that the cars today did not provide the protection that this one did. "Do you think you will sell it down the road?" he asked. "No, because the longer I have, the more value it will have," I said. "Cars of that generation are getting rarer all the time. I want to break it in before I stop using it regularly." "Keep it to yourself, but my daughter Marge has been watching us," he said as we were looking under the hood. I laughed and said, "I'm not worried based on what she has dated in the past. I'm definitely not her type." "Maybe, but you're the first young man she's looked at since Ralph's death," he said. "Perhaps she is healed and is once again ready to get on with life." After closing it all up, I opened the driver door, getting ready to go home, only to hear Margaret say, "Raymond, please don't leave. I need to talk to you." I saw her walking down the stairs, and for the first time in my life, I saw her as a young lady and not just the kid from around the block. Margaret was a natural beauty. Height was about 5'7". Her curves were strong and defined. She had a wholesome look that I found appealing. Her reddish-brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail. The fact that she was not loaded up with makeup like most of the girls in the crowd were, to me, was an added plus. I, on the other hand, at 5'10", had a well-defined upper chest, but from the lower chest down I was skin and bone. My family said I always had a barrow chest, whatever that meant. So, I was wide at the top but narrow towards the bottom. My natural curly brown hair, the longer it got, the more it looked like a styled afro. Right now, I needed a haircut badly. Growing up, my mother always said in winter I looked bulky and big. In the summer, with no shirt on, I looked like one of the starving children from Africa. At my age of 18, when I had my shirt off, if I sucked in my stomach, you could still see the outlines of my rib cage. Margaret walked with a confidence that said she knew who she was and what she wanted. The white t-shirt she was wearing accented the softness of her frame. "The prom is in 6 weeks," she said. "The first thing I need to know is, can you dance?" "Not really," I said honestly. "I can perhaps pass on a square dance where I am being directed, but that's about it." "Why not?" she asked. "I never found someone worth developing an interest in it for," I explained, not knowing what else to say. "For me to desire to start dancing, it would be because I wanted to please the girl I was dating." "Then we're going to have to do a lot of practicing over the next 6 weeks, she said. "And why are we going to be doing that?" I asked. "Because you're taking me to the prom," she laughed. "Are you serious?" I asked. She took my hand into hers and said, "Yes, unless we find that you're not teachable." It was fun learning to dance. When the church had a social just before the prom, I went to test out what I had learned. In its huge basement, my dancing had improved so much that it got me a lot of attention. 2 girls asked me if I had a date for the prom in front of the boys who were interested in them. Margaret was unable to attend, but she sure heard about it. Everyone asked me who had given me lessons, so I told them. The next week at school, a lot of the boys who had been watching asked Margaret if she would give them lessons also. She answered them saying, "If Raymond will allow it, I will." One quick look at me made them decide it might be best to get lessons elsewhere, as I had been into weightlifting for years. The coach at the high school had tried for years to get me to join the football team, but it just wasn't my thing. I could play most sports but wasn't into them. The night of the prom was the first time I saw Margaret in a dress. It was such a memorable moment that until today I could close my eyes and picture that image in my mind. The light blue, strapless full-length dress hugged her frame, accenting the natural beauty of her body in all its glory. Her cleavage was half hidden, but left no doubt there was lots of it. I still believe to this day that was the moment I knew I had fallen in love with her. It was also the first time I asked myself, why was she with someone like me? She had the style and grace that I would never have. That night could not have gone better. Although we were not the king and queen, we were treated as if we were royalty. Everyone was envious of my old restored 40s Ford. If I was asked by another girl for a dance, I made sure that Margaret was okay with it. When a boy asked her, she did the same in reverse. One of the chaperones told us it was nice to see a couple so young treating each other with such respect. The lady said, "You two have something special. Make sure you don't let the jealousy of others break it up." By the end of the school year, we had broken up because of what I accidentally saw. Peter Reynolds, the school quarterback, had her in his arms. I was with a group of friends when we caught them. I stood there looking at them from across the football field, sharing a very intimate kiss. When one of the girls asked me what I was thinking, I replied, "There goes my soon-to-be former girlfriend walking from one man to another willingly." That night I went over to her parents' place, and in front of them, I told Margaret who I was with and what we had all saw. When I asked her how long the relationship had been going on, she wouldn't give me any answers. I said, "Thanks for wasting my time. I won't be a bother to you anymore." She teared up and seemed upset, but I didn't buy it because if she felt that way, she would not have started flirting with him. From that point on, if I saw her coming down the street towards me, I would cross the street to avoid her. Her father later had told my dad that not even they had a clue as to what she was doing behind my back. My dad told him I wasn't saying much, but he knew that I had been hurt. I had gone home to change into blue jeans before going to our restaurant to get a bite to eat, planning to sit on a session in the bar for an hour or two afterward. I was sitting there enjoying the meal when Peter's wife Tammy walked in. When I first noticed her, she gave me the impression she was a woman who had a lot of things on her mind. It got my interest up because she was making a beeline directly towards me. When she reached my table, I stood up. Tammy was not a local girl. She had met Peter while he was getting his post-education in law enforcement. Her parents had come from old money. I firmly believe that the only reason Peter had married her was because of that fact. Margaret got dumped by him for her. Tammy was still a very nice-looking lady with her black hair, dark blue crystal eyes, and a smile that would draw anyone's attention. She had a nice frame that most men would love cuddling with on a regular basis. I had always thought that Peter had traded up when she married him. Peter had just come back to town 4 years ago from across the state when our old police chief had retired. When he applied for the advertised opening, they liked the fact that he had come from the area originally. When they had done checking him out and interviewing him, they had worked out an agreement that brought him home. "Tammy, it's been quite a while," I said. "You look beautiful. How are your kids doing?" "The kids are growing just like yours," Tammy said. "I'm here to discuss Peter and Margaret and what we're going to do about it." "Not much we can do about it," I said, "until the construction is done. Not with the progressive mayor of Jackson trying to mini-manage everything that's being done. He takes the simple, making it complicated, and seems to thrive in it. Meanwhile, what is really important gets ignored by him constantly." "Is that what Margaret told you was going on?" Tammy asked. "Because if that was true, should not Jackson Carter, who is sitting with his wife on the left side, be there at the meeting?" I looked over and saw them. I guess my face showed my shock and surprise. Tammy was right. He was a member of the Jackson City Council. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew about Peter's and Margaret's relationship," Tammy said. "Their affair has been going on hot and heavy for about 18 months. When you first hear a statement like that from someone you're hardly acquainted with, it causes you to pause and question their motives." As far as I could see, Tammy had none. As a registered nurse, she worked the afternoons at the nursing home from 3 p.m. to 11. I took her comment with a grain of salt. "I have a prenup," she said. "My concern is if I go forward, how badly will it end up hurting you?" "I'm not one to take what one says on serious matters as the truth," I said. "I have to be able to prove it for myself." "I figured that," Tammy said as she handed me a piece of paper. "It's the address of the house they are in right now. It's owned by a guy doing 7 in the prison. Peter has promised him a reduction in his sentence so that he can use it. The idiot doesn't know that there is nothing Peter can do." "How did you get it?" I asked. "I took a permanent day off and used a rental car to follow your wife," she said. "The last time Peter gave me the same excuse. Then I went to the country records to get his name and checked out the records to find what I could about him using my husband's link at home to the police station. I am going to go check for myself," I said. "Let's exchange cell phone numbers and agree to text each other to see if it's safe to talk. If it's proven you were right, we got a lot of talking to do." After saying goodbyes to each other, I paid my bill and headed out. I went to my car and said, "Hey Google, directions to 475 Old Cape Road," which ran between Cape and Jackson. It was a 10-minute drive in the darkness of night. I pulled off the side of the road. Under the security light on the telephone pole on the property, I could plainly see my wife's car and a police vehicle parked side by side. I just had to sit and wait to find out who was driving it. While waiting, I watched 4 hours of Hell's Kitchen on Pluto TV on my cell phone. Finally, the two lovers came out to their cars. Before leaving, they share a deep, passionate kiss. There was no doubt about it. There was my baby in another man's arms. She had walked willingly from one to another. It was sad, because I'd been in this same situation before with them. Now I knew the real reason why Peter Reynolds had moved back, and it pissed me off totally. Seeing them together made me realize that I was right. Peter had married Tammy because of her family money. I turned on my car using the electrical features, so it made no sound, and drove away before turning my headlights on. Under the interior lights, I called Tammy via my cell phone. She answered right away. "Give me a month, please," I asked, "for me to be able to take them both down in such a way that they won't know what hit them." "What are you going to do, Ray?" Tammy asked. "Put them in a hole so deep," I replied, "that it will take them years to dig out of." I now knew why we had grown apart emotionally. Her mind, heart, and eyes had been captured by another. By the time I got home, I had already starting to format a plan to even out the playing field before going for the touchdown that would give me victory. The woman I was married to had turned away from her family and had given her body, mind, and soul to someone else. I had seen for a second time that there goes my baby going from one to another willingly. As a result, there would never be another chance for either of them. I made it home 10 minutes before my wife did. Thankfully, our 3 children were all on sleepovers. I quickly undressed, got under our bed sheets, and turned cable news on. I knew that because I was watching the news that Margaret would not come to bed until I had fallen asleep. It didn't take long until she entered our bedroom heading for the shower, just like she always normally did. I slowly pretended to go to sleep. It didn't take long until she joined me smelling as fresh as she always did when she came to bed. Taking the remote, she turned on Murder, She Wrote, to fall asleep to. 2 hours later, I went downstairs and found her work keys at the bottom of her purse. Using a sheet of freezer wrap paper, I spread the Play-Doh out on it and got impressions of all of them. By the time I came back to retrieve them from the basement, it would be dried out and hard. It would be easy to have copies made, and I knew who to go to for that to be done quietly. My next move would be to go and see a man in prison to see if he could give me access to his house. It was the best thing I could have done because he, like me, had enough of Peter Reynolds and his unkept promises. Thankfully, he had the connections inside and out to take what I was thinking about doing even further. It would prove to be the smartest move I ever made. I also sold him a new home insurance policy on his house for weekends later. The smartest thing you can do at times when you're faced with a situation you know you cannot win is to stay calm, relax, and do nothing. Act like you don't give a damn because it implies that you don't believe them. Soon they begin to comprehend that you don't give a damn about the shit you're hearing them splutter. It tends to piss the person that is talking to you off. It throws them off their game. They get sweaty, all worked up all over nothing except their own frustration. They really do not like the blank look you have on your face because it implies that you have no clue what they're going on about. That is what I had been doing for the last 4 hours. The two detectives had been trying to interview me about the man who they claimed was supposedly screwing my wife behind my back for months. By now, I believed that they were at the point that they believed I was a complete moron. They had so delicately implied that I had to have known about their relationship, even though by this time they might be starting to believe I was simple-minded. When that didn't work, they tried being aggressive. The two detectives showed me pictures of their secret love nest and explained that the meetings that they had been supposedly going to for months were not really meetings. They laid out in detail how they figured I had figured it out and why. As a result, according to their thinking, I had to have done something to their beloved police chief Peter Reynolds. They had even brought up the point that he had successfully caused us to break up once before. My thoughts were, boy, Margaret must have told them all of her dirty secrets. They now had my attention because I was eager to find out what these dumbass would spill in their attempt to wear me down to the point that I would start opening up. I sat up and stopped slouching and began to pay attention. I showed them facial reactions that showed surprise, sadness, and remorse at times. My days of hot rodding were paying off. I had learned back then to develop a poker face. You always had to disguise your thoughts and feelings when looking at your competition. There was no way you would give any idiot you were racing a physiological edge. I loved the way they had gone about doing things. If they only knew that I saw them as being dumb and dumber and was treating them accordingly. The only game they had left to play was a bad cop, good cop against me. 2 days ago, my loving wife went to their special spot only to find her lover missing. She had discovered a police uniform, wallet, gun, holster, watch and ring sitting in a nice pile of drying blood. She had called the police department in a panic, reporting a possible crime scene, and walked back out of the house not touching anything in order to protect the evidence. What she didn't realize until it was too late was that she would have to explain why she was there. The little situation she found herself in became very serious quickly because of the identity of the man whose personal items were sitting in a pile of red drying blood. On top of that, his police cruiser was parked right beside hers. It forced her to have to reveal her 19-month affair with her boss, the respected and well-thought-of chief of police. When the detectives investigating the situation asked who might have known about their relationship, she said she had no clue. In desperation, after being questioned multiple times by them, she said, "The last person I would suspect would be my husband Raymond because he is always at work at our bar on Friday and Saturday nights." She did not realize until later that I had been working on a special project at the request of our pastor, so I hadn't been going to the bar in months. When I got home that night, she was an emotional basket case. I tried to get my wife to explain what was bothering her. So did our children. She explained that what she was going through was just some emotional moments that come with the change. What was puzzling the investigators was the fact that his gun had not even been fired. There was no sign of an apparent struggle. There were only the 2 wine glasses, a dozen red roses still in the box, and 2 bottles of wine in the fridge. It looked it was going to be a romantic evening for the two. It did not take long for the police officers to verify that I was not where my wife thought I was on those 2 nights and hadn't been for weeks. The 2 detectives then assumed I had no alibi. For some reason, no one could find me. For them, because of what they thought they knew, I had automatically become the prime suspect. This Sunday after Sunday morning service, just as we were finishing talking with the pastor, the 2 detectives came up to take me in for questioning. It was totally embarrassing to be confronted by them in such a public manner. I understood full well that they were in a complete panic. If Peter Reynolds was still alive, he must be in need of medical attention. His life could be in danger. Our 3 children were totally upset. I could tell by the look on Margaret's face that she was not expecting this. Playing dumb as to make it appear that I had no idea why they would want to talk to me. I refused to go and said I was going home and headed towards my car. They arrested me for aiding and abetting in a possible murder. They placed my hands behind my back and handcuffed me, then started leading me to their car. My 3 children started crying. Both of our parents were standing there in shock. As they led me away, I turned to my wife and said in a cold voice, "What have you accused me of now, Margaret?" Her face went white. Our parents had witnessed the whole thing, and so had the members of our parish. I was lying what was happening right at her feet, knowing what gossip it would create. As they placed me in the back of the police cruiser, I turned and looked at my wife and smiled. I knew that within half an hour, it would be believed everywhere that my wife was behind me being taken into custody. My wife must have turned on me, but why? What had she exposed about me that would have caused this to happen? On Friday night, 2 of my Chinese brothers in our little organization that had been put together by the owner of the property had loaded him in an open crate on an empty freight truck. Sadly, he had no clue that they had spiked a few of his afterwork drinks with a good dose of knockout drugs that would last a few hours, and then gave him a drip of chloroform that would keep him out of it for the next couple of days. If they had applied the right doses, he should be waking up in about half an hour. It was my job to be the idiot that the police focused on. The longer I was kept by them, the better. So far, it had gone far better than planned. By pushing the side of the crate, it would collapse, leaving him free and buck naked. The only problem, he could be headed for anywhere. We had been kind enough to leave him a nice orange outfit that he could get into. It was the same one the prisoners in the county jail wore. It had even the identification of the jail on its pocket. It read the property of the Cape Girardeau County Jail. I figured it wouldn't be until the truck next stop before his loud yelling would attract enough attention to get him discovered. By that time, he would be stuck trying to identify himself without any proof. If we had not supplied him with enough for his size and weight, he could already be wide awake. So, after 4 hours of acting deaf and dumb, I finally spoke. Could I perhaps have a cup of strong black tea? They saw this as a sign of making progress. I was beginning to open up to them. One of the detectives left the room and was gone for about 15 minutes. His partner was wondering what was taking him so long. He came back with a white face and acting kind of meekly. The younger detective knew something had changed. "Mr. Burns, we owe you an apology," the older detective said. "It appears the chief overdrank and ended up getting himself into a situation that he shouldn't have. When he was found, he was hung over in an empty freight truck near the border in Sumas, Washington, heading towards Canada. He was wearing a stolen orange jumpsuit. We now have his own words saying that it was his own complete doing. He said he really can't explain anything as his mind is foggy. It must have been one hell of a bender. How long have you all been covering up the fact that he's nothing but a drunk? Does he have blackout periods like this a lot? I guess I'm going to have to buy my own cup of tea," I said. "Could one of you direct me to the closest place where I could get one? I need to think things out and get them down on paper before seeing a lawyer for the civil lawsuit that I'm going to be bringing against the police department for false arrest." The look on the faces of those 2 detectives went white. I was speaking with knowledge and authority. They now knew I was not very impressed with everything that happened. Ask yourself why the chief wanted to have an alibi for the weekend that could not be broken. Why did my better half, the admitted mistress of him, according to what you have been telling me for the last 4 hours, want me to be arrested? I asked while looking right at them. Maybe if you looked at them as much as you did me, you'll find what they both seem to be protecting. Are you implying that we were set up deliberately? The younger detective asked. No. I was just wondering why they felt that I needed an alibi with you to this afternoon. Now if you could return my cell phone, I said. I'd like to get out of here and head towards a restaurant to get me a cup of black tea since you 2 refused to get me one. We had just about made it to the front door when the front desk officer said, "Mr. Burns, the pig and whistle silent alarm went off just over 2 hours ago. We have officers already there investigating the scene. It appears that whoever broke in had a key and had the combo to the safe." "Shit," I said. "There was over $20,000 in cash sitting in the safe as of 11 o'clock last night." The 2 detectives looked at me in total shock as I said, "I guess I now know why I was wanted here." With that, I headed out the front door to go to my restaurant and bar. I had to see what damage was done when they had broken in. I had walked about half a block when a nice young police officer offered me a ride. As I climbed into the passenger side of the front seat, he informed me he'd been ordered to take me there. In front of him, I called Margaret, my soon-to-be ex-wife. She answered on the first ring. I knew he would have been instructed to record everything with his video cam. "The detectives have finally released me after dropping the charges," I said. "It seems that Peter Reynolds, your lover as it was explained to me by them, is alive and kicking. I imagine that you must be feeling so relieved. Based on what I have learned, I had asked myself if you had gone after Peter to pay back Tammy for stealing him from you. The police are taking me over to the Pig and Whistle because it was broken into today while I was in police custody. Did you and your long-term lover perhaps plan all of this to destroy any credibility I might have had in the divorce that is now coming? I hung up the phone and said, imagine that she ended the call before I was even finished taking. Now, why would she do that unless she didn't want to answer the questions I had? It makes me wonder what else she is hiding. I called my parents, and when my father answered, I said, Dad, can you and Mom do me a favor? After my dad agreed, I said, call Margaret. Let her know you're coming for my clothes and the keys to my Ford truck. Then bring them both over to the Pig and Whistle. I'm headed there with the police. All the charges against me have been dropped, so I will be looking into suing them for false arrest and public slander. It appears that I may have been set up deliberately by someone with inside knowledge of the workings of the police department. What the hell is going on, Ray? My dad asked. Oh, didn't you know? I said. The police arrested me because they suspected that I had killed my wife's lover, Peter Reynolds, the chief of police. Hell, I did not even know about the affair until the detectives revealed it to me when they were questioning me about it. I looked over at the young police officer's face to see it was pure white. I knew he had believed what he was hearing. I smiled because none would know what magic could be created as a result of a few imprints of keys and Play-Doh, and the agreement of paying of a person's back property tax in the police chief's name using cash. For some reason, the police officer stopped on the way to my bar to make sure I got the largest hot black tea that he could buy. During the drive over, the pastor of our church and a young minor child, a member of our church, appeared at the police station to provide me with an alibi. The detectives learned that I had been for months spending my time working with the child as a member of the Big Brother organization. The congregation was providing the money needed for the project I was working on. The young man and I had spent Friday and Saturday working on a vehicle that we were restoring. The reason we were keeping it a secret was because it was going to be a surprise for his single mother whose birthday was coming up. It was going to be the first car she ever owned as a single mother. It couldn't have been any worse for those police detectives. They saw their future employment going out of the window because of how incompetent the police department looked. The pastor had brought a news crew with him. They had to explain everything. It would make the 10 p.m. news and be in the paper on Monday. I got there to discover that the back door had been used to gain access. I told the officer that it implied to me that the person had knowledge of the layout, so they could avoid the security system. It must have been an inside job. The only ones who have keys to the office are the two managers, my wife and me. The police were making a mess by looking for fingerprints. I reminded them that my mine had been taken when they booked me and took my photograph. I was treated with the highest respect. They were almost done when I asked them if they knew a locksmith that would be willing to come out and rekey the locks at supper time on Sunday. Thankfully, they did, so I called him. It was going to be expensive, but they all agreed that it was the best way to make sure the place was secure. I pointed out that the bank's night deposit bag was missing, that the money was in. With their permission, I got out my bank deposit book and used the printer to give them a copy of it. It was noted that I had put in 10 checks. Is that important? I asked. Only if we find them in a spot where they shouldn't be? Little did we know that those 10 checks would be found in a locked drawer in the police chief's office at the station later that week. The cash would never be found. Mom and Dad arrived just as the locksmith did. He rekeyed the 5 locks and gave me the 4 copies I needed. After he left, we sat down and talked while having a drink in the bar. They were devastated to learn how I had found out about my wife's affair this afternoon. Dad thought he should call Margaret's father and let him know. That's when my side learned that this was not the first time that Peter Reynolds had interfered with my wife's and my relationship. This time it would be the last. Mom said I could stay with them until I got it sorted out. As soon as my kids heard that I had been released, they called me. I explained what I had learned at the police station to each one individually and told them that I would be staying at their grandparents for now. They were shocked to learn that their mother had been committing adultery for so long. After my parents left, I locked up and got into my pride and joy that I had owned for over 18 years. It was still in mint condition, and I normally would drive it for car shows or rallies. In privacy, I texted Tammy, "Can you talk?" It took seconds for my cell phone to ring. "Raymond, are you okay?" Tammy asked. "I'm getting by," I said. "It's been quite a stressful day learning about my wife's and your husband's affair for the first time. How did you handle it? I'm presuming you heard about it Friday night." "It was shocking," she replied. "Can we meet and talk about it?" "I was just getting ready to go to Cracker Barrel to get something to eat," I said. "If you want, you can join me there." "On my way," Tammy said. "I will wait for you in their retail section." She was there when I arrived. We must have looked like an odd couple with her in blue jeans and me in my church suit. We asked the hostess to give us a seat that afforded us a bit of privacy. Thankfully, by that time of night, it wasn't busy. After ordering what we wanted, we started talking quietly. I was in total shock when the detectives showed up at my place of work on Friday night to inform me what they had discovered, Tammy said. Then I remembered you saying give me 4 weeks. I told the officers that in my heart, I didn't believe he was dead, Tammy said. Then they asked me if I knew about Peter's affair. What affair? I said. Then they had to explain how they had found out. I pretended to be just as shocked as you were. I said, I never suspected that I would be arrested in such a public manner. I left the detectives with a bunch of questions that will require them to investigate further. The beauty of it all was that your wife was forced to oust them both, Tammy said. That gets rid of a lot of bullshit going forth. Be prepared, the detectives will be asking you if your husband has a drinking problem, I said. I kind of left the impression that he did. That is easy to handle, Tammy said. I'll just say I believe he does. But Peter is still in denial. Going to see Dale Britton tomorrow to see if he will represent me, I said. I'm going to add more pressure onto the situation by launching a civil suit against the city police department, your husband, and of course the divorce from my wife. I'll instruct my lawyer to post a legal notice, she said, that I will no longer be responsible for any of his debts going forward. Tammy, I said, there is one more thing you need to know. In our last year of high school, when Margaret and I were dating, we ended up breaking up because of your husband moving in on Margaret behind my back. He dumped her for you as she had done to me. It's made wonder if Margaret went after Peter to even the score. That revelation of our history explained a lot of things in her eyes. I knew that Margaret had a new enemy for life. So, when did you and Margaret reconnect? She asked. About 8 months after the announcement of your marriage, I said, was published in the local paper. Margaret Burns was sitting there trying to figure out how it could have gone so wrong so fast. It had been a total shock to her when the police had arrested her husband just as they were preparing to go out for their usual Sunday meal together. The coldness in Ray's voice when he said, "What have you accused me of now, Margaret?" said it all. It had raised a lot of questions right away. Sadly, not one of them could be answered because of her need to keep her behavior a secret. Now both sides of their family knew of her affair. Her own 3 children were upstairs crying. The way that Ray had found out had to be devastating to him. What did not make sense? If Peter Reynolds was alive, why hadn't he contacted her? Each of their children had come down individually to inform her that they had talked to their father after his parents had come to get his personal belonging. That's when she had learned that her husband had told them all he had been arrested because he was accused of killing his wife's lover until he was found alive. Ray had explained that someone had played a very serious joke that had gone overboard to the extreme. When they had asked him why, he explained, "Someone wanted your mother's and her lover's long-term conduct brought out in a public manner. I think it was someone he has helped put away. Hopefully, they will call on the state to investigate the whole situation because it now looks like the credibility of the Cape City police has been brought into question." Ray had indirectly, out and out accused them of being behind it all because of the work they did. His arrest, the break-in at their restaurant, and the destruction of 2 marriages were beginning to look like it was one huge plan. What Margaret did not know was that the children had held a family meeting among themselves up in one of the bedrooms and had jointly decided that when the divorce came, they would be going to live with their dad. Margaret had regretted ever getting involved with Peter after he had dumped her. She knew that he was a user of people to the extreme. It had been at their father's annual company picnic 2 years later that Ray and she started talking to each other again. It wasn't until weeks later after that picnic that she learned via friends how much she had hurt him. She hadn't realized that he had fallen head over heels in love with her. To her, at that time, he had just been a friend. Many had said it had forever changed him, and they had been right. The Raymond she had met that day was unknown to her. He was a man who kept to himself and never said much. There was a distance and a coldness to him that she had never seen before. Although he walked tall and proud, he walked alone. That first day they only shared a few words, and he had refused to discuss what he was doing with his life. His former openness was gone. Her parents had revealed later that he hadn't dated anyone since her. It was the car accident a few months later on the Interstate 55 that changed everything. She had blown a tire while speeding, causing her to lose control, and had rolled the car more than once. It had started to burn. Ray had been driving the other way, had pulled over into the medium. Through the smoke, he had crawled into the front seat to undo the seatbelt buckle and pull her out. Until she was cleared from danger, he did not even know it was her. He had held her until the first responders arrived, then called her parents to inform them what happened. She had been semi-conscious, but could hear him telling her he still loved her to hang on. She had been in recovery for over a week, and when he was not working, he was there by her side. Her view of what kind of love she was looking for changed, and she began to see Ray in a different light. 8 months later, she became his bride. She had over time grown to love him, but she was never in love with him like he was with her. Everything was fine until Peter Reynolds came back into her life, looking as good as he ever did. In time, he swept her off her feet, and they had become lovers. Never had any man inspired such passion or emotions from her as Peter did. Peter had given her that spark and the thrill of what young love was to her for the first time. She felt like a young girl with a huge crush all over again. They both felt the attraction as soon as he had assumed his position. It wasn't long until they couldn't resist the desire they had for each other. Now 2 families had been destroyed. Ray, her husband, had been hurt to the extreme, and sadly she knew better than most that he didn't deserve it. Raymond had been a good husband and provider all their marriage. She was still lost in her thoughts when her eldest walked into the room. "Mom, the 3 of us have been upstairs talking," Jean said firmly. "We decided that since I was the oldest, I should be the one to inform you that we will be going to live with Dad when the divorce is done. That way you can have the quality of life that you seem to want with Mr. Reynolds." Margaret just started to bawl. Her own conduct was costing her everything, and the only one she could blame was herself. Her eldest daughter, the mini version of her, had expressed it well by pointing out what her own conduct was saying. "I was at the Pig and Whistle bright and early. I had to be to allow the staff in. Those who had to be in this early had watched the 4am early news. Everyone was dealing with the information that had been revealed. It forced me to state that no matter what, the Pig and Whistle would remain open. I gave the restaurant manager her new keys and the new combo for the safe. I gave her the set for the bar manager and instructed her to give the safe combo to him. She was surprised that I did not suspect the staff. She assigned one of the staff to clean up the fingerprint markings and do a general cleanup of the back area in my office. It was an above-normal opening for a weekday. As I waited for my breakfast to be served, I got the impression that a lot had come in out of their own curiosity. Afterward, I went to work as I normally would. My staff was super supportive of me and what I was dealing with. I called Dale Britton's office and was able to get the appointment for 1 p.m. I spent the morning answering calls and dealing with the little things that came up. As soon as I got to his office, I knew he was taking the case. Dale had never liked the new police chief that had come in after he had left. Dale thought Peter Reynolds was an arrogant, self-serving a-hole who had the skill to do the job, but came across as always looking for an edge. As soon as Margaret got to the office, the 2 detectives went into her office to have a long chat with her. They wanted to know if her husband would sue. She said, "He really has no choice. You destroyed his reputation by jumping the gun, exposed Peter and my affair to him, and as a result, destroyed his life as he knew it. It seems you completely ignored looking into what Peter did after he had left work on Friday. If this was a setup as my husband figures it is," Margaret said, "you have to find out who and why. My question is, where was Peter found?" "In the back of a freight truck near the border, in a town in the state of Washington," the older detective said. "It's been asked if Peter had been on a bender and blacked out. In comparing him to my husband, I would say his drinking can be excessive, but I've never seen him drunk," Margaret explained. "That question should really be directed to his wife." It was revealed on the lunchtime news that the mayor had asked the state to come in and investigate the situation. 6 days later, the pastor that Sunday called the single mother up and presented her with the keys to the car after the regular service was finished. It wasn't brand new, but it was now in mint condition and fully insured. I watched as he explained how her 10-year-old son and I had worked together using his place to restore it to this condition. You could not help but be affected by her emotional response and pure tears of joy. My kids, as soon as they arrived, had seen my Ford truck and had joined me to sit with me during the service. I was surprised to see that Margaret did not attend. It was the first one she had missed in months. Then it dawned on me she could not have handled the stares or the whispers behind her back. The 3 of my children had walked the 2 miles to get here. I couldn't help but be proud of them. My 2 daughters proudly held my hand as the single mother praised me over and over again for the knowledge and the time I had imparted on her son. "I saw the changes in my son over the last few months," she said. "Out of the blue, he started fixing things around the house as I could afford to purchase what we needed. I knew Brother Burns was mentoring him, but I never realized by just how much until the neighbors started paying him to help them out where he could. Instead of keeping the money he put in our house fund jar. For the first time in years, we have no bills, no debts outside of the small mortgage on the house. I don't think Brother Burns knows how much he had improved our lives. My son finally has bought us a computer, and he's using it to help him to repair and fix small appliances." Afterward, she came over and hugged me tightly, thanking me once again. My dad and I exchanged keys once she was finished so I could take my children out to lunch and have some private time with them. I asked Agnes to inform their mother what we were doing so she wouldn't be concerned. Peter and Margaret's last few weeks of life were now being dissected as if they were under a microscope. One of the questions they were trying to answer was how the 9 checks out of the pig and whistle bank deposit had got into a locked drawer that only Peter had a key to. The other question was where the money come from that paid the back taxes on the property they were using to have the affair. They had discovered it had been brought up to date, and this year's taxes were prepaid on Wednesday of this week, one full day after Peter's return, in cash. On Friday, the city, Peter Reynolds and Margaret Burns had been served. Dale Britton had acted quickly and effectively. He had the suit against the city served on the mayor himself. Surprisingly, that same day an envelope was delivered to the mayor's office that contained a set of keys. The 2 detectives soon discovered they were keys to the police station and a copy of the old master key for the pig and whistle. They now believed it definite had been an inside job by someone on the police force because Margaret's desk sat outside Peter's office and was visible to anyone in the big open room. Of course, they had to turn what they found over to the state, who were now leading the investigation. It was clear that anyone could have copied the keys because Margaret had never had a way to lock her purse up, and it was always beside her at her desk. If she had gone to do something, someone could have taken them easily, without anyone really paying attention. It was over lunch at Yumi's that I first learned of my children's wishes to live with me. I learned that their mother was struggling to come to terms with the end of our marriage. I explained that too often in life we don't consider the consequences of our actions until the damage is done. A good example is the number of people who are doing time for doing something stupid because they did not stop and think about the opportunity in front of them. "Dad," Jean said, "is the adultery the only reason you're divorcing Mom?" "No," I replied. "The adultery is only physical proof part of it. In order to be able to go that far, your mother had to leave the family emotionally, mentally, and spiritually before committing the act. It's the same way as Jesus explained when he said, 'I will never leave you.' We lose our faith and draw away from him. Your mother had to separate herself from us and our views on life as a family in order to begin her affair. The act was the final blow to the marriage because it caused us all to lose the ability to trust her. Nothing is as simple as it seems," Wade said quietly. "Her own eyes deceived her and took her down. Because of the conduct of one, we are going to all have to live with the outcome of it all." I sat there amazed. My son had put it together and explained it better than I ever could. He had me wondering where that wisdom had come from. "She went willingly from one man to another," Agnes said, "knowing what she was doing. That's why I will never forgive her." To change the conversation, I asked them all what they would like in our new home. That led to an open and honest discussion. When I dropped them off at the roadside in front of my former home, I saw Margaret looking out the window. I did not acknowledge her. As soon as the kids reached the house and entering, I drove off to my dad's to get ready for a dinner date with Tammy. I would learn later that Margaret had spent the whole evening in her bedroom crying. Tammy saw my old 40s Ford truck for the first time when I picked her up. We had about a 25-minute drive to go to the pizza restaurant in Marble Hills. We were both dressed casually. Peter had been a bundle of nerves ever since he got back from his unexpected trip, Tammy said. It did not help when he learned he had to find a new place to live. I had him served the moment he got off the plane. "Have you been asked about his drinking?" I asked. "More than once. I gave them a few suggestions where he likes to hang out," Tammy said. "I dropped the name of the place you wanted me to. Why was that important?" "It's known by a select few to be a front for a high-class escort service," I said. "The police are going to find that he's a client." Tammy started to laugh because it struck her as funny. When she calmed down, she said, "I would love to see the look on Margaret's face when she learns that. Bravo, Ray, well done." "Everything is being done to get him kicked out of the police force with his reputation completely destroyed," I said. "There will be nothing they can convict him with, but they will say he was forced out with no reference because of the evidence. His 20-year police career is his whole life," Tammy said, "is going to be destroyed because he couldn't keep it in his pants. I love it. You don't get mad, you get more than even." I then told her about my afternoon with the kids and basically what we had discussed. Tammy teared up as I went through it. "You made me see the whole mess in a way I would never have considered," she said. "Why didn't I meet someone with your logic sooner?" "That's because our walk in life has made us what we are today," I said. "Before now, we most likely had not experienced life enough to develop this kind of understanding." With that remark digesting in her mind, she slid over closer to me and said, "I'm going to enjoy getting to know you a lot better." Tammy was impressed with the pizza place. She met a longtime friend of mine and his wife. Scott and Trish Tate were in having dinner with their little daughter, who was just under 5 years old. We could plainly see she was about to bring into the world a brother or sister for her. I got a kick out of the fact that she had no clue who he was. They had just arrived before we did and invited us to join them. Tammy and Trish seemed to hit it off. Scott and I talked about the whole public mess and my plans going forward. Scott told me if I needed the funds to buy out my soon-to-be ex-wife from the Pig and Whistle to let him know. He would be willing to help me out. I explained to the both of them who Tammy was, and they seemed to take it all in stride. I learned from him that once Peter was removed, they would be promoting the captain instead of going outside to find his replacement. Scott thought that was what the town should have done in the first place. If they had, none of what was going on would have happened. Tammy, when she heard that, had a smile on her face that I would describe as a mile wide. The extra-large pizza pie was over the top. Between the food and the 2 pitchers of beer, we all overate. It was Trish who suggested we all get together next Saturday night for an informal evening of dinner and dancing at Bithia's on Bithia. Tammy said it's a date. Trish, if you don't mind me asking, Tammy said, how did you meet Scott? Scott used to work as an investigator for the state, Trish explained. On my 29th birthday, I tried to arrest him. As a result, we got handcuffed to each other, and 11 months later we were married. Ray can tell you our full story later. Tammy, Trish's parents have been friends for years. We met because we both belong to the Legion, I explained. I met Scott through them. How are Helen and John doing? Busy beavers with their grandchildren, Trish said with a smile. You know, Mom, she not really happy unless she has them running after her. After learning that Tammy was a registered nurse, the ladies had to exchange phone numbers. Scott and Trish picked up the bill as we prepared to call it a night. By the time we got back to her place, I had to pull in and finish their story. 2 weeks later, Peter Reynolds and Margaret were sitting in Dunkin' Donuts Sunday morning having a coffee, trying to figure out who was trying to destroy him. From the tip that sent him into a hole in the wall, his walking up in the back of the truck naked, the robbery of the Pig and Whistle, the paying of the taxes on the property that they had used, the finding of the stolen checks in a locked drawer, and now the claim that he was a client of an expensive high-end escort service was putting him in a situation where he was being forced out. The state police and the detectives working with him now believed it was the break-in at the Pig and Whistle that provided the money to pay for this. Margaret had finally admitted that the piece of paper with the combo for the safe had come from the bottom of her jewelry box at home. The detectives, upon hearing that, concluded that Peter could have easily discovered it when he was in her bedroom. Everybody they worked with now believed that he deliberately had used Margaret to cover up his bad habits. It had reached the point where he would not even have an alcoholic beverage. It was believed he had been on a bender the weekend he disappeared. It was magnified because it was a media story. Peter had suggested that Margaret's husband might be the one who was behind it. The detectives ran the interview tapes to show his facial expressions when he learned about the affair. They had the recorded audio of Ray talking to Margaret and her apparently ending the call, then calling his parents for help. Everything they had recorded pointed to the fact that he had no clue about their relationship. The decisive factor was when the pastor provided him with an unbreakable alibi for the weekend in question. Raymond Burns had been brilliant in his comments, laying the foundation that he had been set up by Margaret and him. So damn well that he had no credibility left. The questions he had raised had led the detectives in a direction that was proving very damaging. The circumstantial evidence was adding up, and it naturally led to just one conclusion. His lawsuit was going to cost the department dearly. Raymond Burns was viewed as being untouchable, an innocent who had just got caught up on this. Whoever is behind this, Margaret said, has enough knowledge of how the police think to manipulate the evidence to point it right at you. The question is, who have you pissed off enough inside the department? Your husband has been careful, Peter said. Even if he wants something from the house, he's using the lawyer to do it. That tells me he's a thinker and is quite capable of doing this. The problem is that it would require a team to pull something off like this. At least 3 people to get you on the truck, Margaret said. Someone within the department to steal my keys and put them back. The key to your drawer could have been copied the day you disappeared. The problem is, how did they get the combo for the safe in my handwriting? Bottom line, Ray is not evil enough to have organized this. The state even talked to the owner of the property, who says that it was nice to see that Peter kept his word, Peter said. My house will be there waiting for me when I get paroled. You're in a situation where everything is stacked against you, Margaret said. It looks like you're going to be forced to resign because they have already stripped you of your authority until the investigations are done. It doesn't help that the detectives feel you set them up and led them to arrest my soon-to-be ex-husband. Is there anything in your past that will give more credibility to the circumstantial evidence? The only thing I can say of a positive nature is that Tammy has not tried to turn our kids against me, Peter said. Both of them feel I am getting a bit of payback for doing what I've done. They refuse to talk about their mother at all with me because, as they say, I gave up the right to know the first time I cheated. At least you still have a relationship with yours, Margaret said. Jean, the oldest, said, "We never left you, Mom. You left us the moment your eyes went to your lover. That's why we are hurting so much. We never saw it until it was too late to confront you with it." Now they are house hunting with their father and preparing to move in with him. Peter sat there in thought, slowly coming to the realization that not only had they destroyed their relationships with their families, but now they as a couple had nothing going for them except the bond of the problems they had brought upon themselves. Hell, they didn't even love each other. I had got the lawyer to arrange for my car to be delivered to my father's via a third party. I traded the electrical car in for a used Ford Explorer, getting the difference back. This afternoon, Tammy, my 3 kids, and I were out house hunting. No, Tammy's and my relationship was still at the getting to know you situation. She had just come with us to be an extra set of eyes. Margaret and I, thanks to our lawyers, had reached an agreement. She got to keep the house and I got to keep the business. The transfer of ownership had already been documented and registered. The city manager had their lawyers looking at my suit and had asked for us to wait until the state's investigation was done. Dale Britton had made it clear that we viewed it as a stalling maneuver. We found a nice home available with 5 acres of land. It had 4 bedrooms, all on the 2nd floor, with a huge master bedroom and a double walk-in closet. A 4-bay garage with an open floor layout on the main floor. It had no basement, but did have a way of shutting down the living room to make it a safe room during a tornado. We'd like the extra building that came with it because we could turn it into a shop for working on cars. We all agreed it needed repainting and the floors needed upgrading on the main floor. I wanted to go laminated all through the lower floor because of easy maintenance. Tammy thought the home otherwise was up to date and current. I said I wanted to change the lights going upstairs to LED lights and have them recessed into the ceiling, along with most of the ceiling lights on the lower floor. I thought the price was high, so I put a bid in that was a lot lower. Tammy called her children, and we all met at Red Lobster for dinner. Both Tammy and I were surprised that the kids all knew of each other, even though hers were a couple of years older and in post-secondary school. That night when I dropped my kids off at their mother's house, Tammy was with me. I would learn from my children the next day that when their mother has seen us together, she had become enraged. In pure anger, Margaret demanded answers to questions that they didn't have because this was the first time they had ever met her. She really got pissed off when Wade told her, "What Dad does with his life is no longer your business. After all, you chose to throw him away from Mr. Reynolds." A month later, on a Tuesday morning just after 9, Peter Reynolds took a look at his office at the police station for the last time. The state's investigation had come in stating that even though there was no proof linking him, everything pointed indirectly at him. The bender he was on and where he was found made it impossible to convict. The mayor and the police captain accepted his badge and his gun. He was given the choice to resign or be terminated. Either way, no reference would be given because of what the evidence implied. He had decided to resign effective immediately, providing no blame would be attributed to Margaret Burns. Whoever had gone after him had done a masterful job at it. His career had been destroyed because he had allowed his eyes to be focused on another. Margaret watched Peter walking out the front door of the police station a broken man. There were no goodbyes or good luck. Everyone was glad to get rid of him. There had been too much drama over the last couple of months because of questionable conduct. Peter was going to be forced to leave town. There was no way he would be able to find employment here. The ongoing onslaught of media questioning had guaranteed that. Margaret felt as if she was losing the only friend she had left in the world. Most of those her husband and she had associated with regularly were not speaking to her. Even her children were busy packing, preparing for the moving day into their father's new house. The house she had thought was too small would be too big for just herself. It saddened her to realize how unimportant that now was. Although things were slowly improving in her relationship with her children, she knew the trust and love they once had for her had changed forever. Peter and she had looked, but had found nothing out about Tammy and Ray's relationship. All they could prove was that they had met each other. Only after that horrible weekend that had destroyed everyone's world was almost over, Raymond was being his usual self, holding everything and refusing to talk about anything but the kids. He and the kids had spent the weekend picking out the furniture they wanted in their bedrooms. From what she had seen of his new place that he had bought, it was bigger than what theirs had been and had more land. He had asked to be able to remove all his shop equipment this Saturday and had requested that she not be around when he was doing it. As his lawyer had said, she was his past, and he was trying to leave it behind him for good. Margaret was just leaving the police station for the day when she saw Tammy standing there looking at her in glee. The news of her soon-to-be ex-husband's resignation had been on the 12 o'clock news. "Peter's broke, you know. The prenub was quite clear on that, because my father's a lawyer and drew it up," Tammy said. "If either one of us committed adultery, We lost everything we put into the marriage but the original value of my trust. It's sad because he can't even afford a 304 like you. Do you know who took him down? Margaret asked. Yes, I do, Tammy said with a big grin. They say that all dogs return to their vomit. Peter did, and it took him down. Margaret knew what Tammy meant and lost it big time. She went at her with pure hate. She was going to kill her. Tammy was prepared and fought back. The staff on hand had to come out and break them up. Margaret was now going to have a black eye that was going to be hard to cover up with makeup. They broke them up and advised Tammy to leave, to allow both of the ladies to calm down. I was called by Tammy's daughter about what had happened. Her mother had taken off the rest of the week to help me set up the house that I would be starting to move into tomorrow since the contractors were doing their cleanup today. I had got a 10-year open mortgage at 3.5% thanks to being able to put a huge down payment out of the retained earnings of my corporation. Tamara thought it was a hoot that two middle-aged women would act like immature children over a man. Ray, she asked while her mother was taking a shower, have you started to heal? I think that your mother and I have helped each other, I said, to ease the pain. We are still at the friend stage, but we're both interested to see where it goes, but not pushing each other. Mom credits you for getting her through all of this, Tamara said. She said it was you who got her to see that her marriage was over before the affair even started. I'm still trying to see how that is possible. In order to have an affair, the person would have had to have been emotionally drawing themselves from the partner they were with, I said. Instead of working on the relationships, they had already decided they wanted a new one. The affair happened because they viewed the marriage as dead. We were still discussing the issue when Tammy sat down beside me and said, I knew there was a problem, Tamara, before we moved down here. I thought the move would give us a fresh start. I was wrong. It takes two to make a relationship work with both giving 110%. I was, your father wasn't. Ray can say the same about Margaret. The moment your partner stops doing that, your relationship is in danger. Mom, Ray, I have a boyfriend who's starting to get serious, she said. Do you think this is something I should discuss with him? We both said yes. 3 weeks later, Judge McDonald lowered his gavel, ending Margaret's and my marriage. I was given primary custody of our 3 children because of their wishes. Margaret had unrestricted access. The mayor, because of Margaret's involvement with Peter, had put her on a 1 year's probation. The terms and conditions we had agreed to had been approved by him. Margaret and I went outside and sat on the bench because it was time to clear up the air. I lost sight of who and what I was the moment Peter came back into my life, Margaret said. I want you to know that. I realize now that I had unresolved issues that I had forgot about. So, did he. Don't blame yourself for any of this. It was all Peter's and my doing. Thank you for that, I said. It answers a lot of questions. I offer you a civil relationship going forward, nothing more. I won't even refer to you as a friend. Outside of our children's lives, we will stay out of each other's way because it's going to take me a long time before I can forgive you. That's more than I expected, she said. Our pastor suggested that I find a new church going forward because many will not let go of what happened. So I have started looking. As far as our children are concerned, whenever we have agreed to something, I shall have them clear it with you to make sure it isn't conflicting with any of your plans. As she got up and walked away, I had to fight myself from saying, stop, let's try again, even though I knew I no longer loved her. It took me a few minutes to understand that it would take time to disassociate myself from the familiar. Thankfully, the relationship that Tammy and I were building would allow us to overcome our shared pasts. Margaret would never know that the greatest gift she had ever given me had come in the last few moments. She, in her words, had given me the freedom to move forward. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.